Good afternoon. We're here to announce the arrest and formal charging of what we believe will be the first of many successes of our cold case unit. I got my first introduction to cold cases from Everett Doolittle of the BCA, who seems like about 100 years ago began the discussion about how he was going back through old evidence lockers and using a newfangled device called DNA to try and solve rape cases, and had begun to look at the idea that maybe we could actually work on these on old homicide cases. And it was a really very creative and innovative step. St. Paul has moved into that process in 2008. Thanks to the work of Senior Commander Lynch and his team, we were able to secure grant funding, and Senior Commander Lynch will discuss that further. We believe that funding and starting the cold case unit was an important step for St. Paul PD. One of the things that I think most people don't understand is that homicide leaves a victim forever asking questions. And that's why homicide is one of those cases that never really goes away. It never goes away for the detectives, it never goes away for the family, and it never goes away for the community that's lost its member. Because of that tragic ripping from kind of the breast of the body that homicide has, it's important for us to never forget the victims of violent crime, and especially our homicide victims. And the cold case unit gives us a vehicle for doing that. It is very difficult to keep up with all of the day-to-day work that a police department of our size does. And so I'm particularly gratified that we've been able to find both the staff that was committed to these old cases and find other partners to be able to work on that. I want to also just highlight that, once again, cold cases are really forever, and I think that's one of the things that people need to understand, not only the public, because sometimes I think they feel like, well, my case is a couple years old, they've moved on. We've never really moved on. We may not have active leads that we can pursue, but we are always working, we are always interested, we're always one tip or one lead away from reopening those cases. I believe that's part of that pursuit of justice that every law enforcement agency is always committed to. It is important for us to know, members of the community know, that we have not given up and that we are just at the very beginning of what, as I said, I think will be a great volume of cases that will come forward due to new technology and new work done by the Detective Division. Now, the cases that we're working on right now are the ones that we think we have the best chances of success by exploiting the new technology of DNA and other technological innovations. Today, the person responsible for a brutal 1977 homicide, Martin Shemukenas, is in custody and will be awaiting trial. I am very, very proud of Senior Commander Lynch, who really was the lead on this, and I'm equally proud of Sergeant Anita Muldoon, who is, as the first leader of our cold case unit, has been passionate about this idea from the days when she worked for us in sex crimes. She was passionate about it when she worked for us in homicide. She has never lost the passion for the victims. She has never given up, and I appreciate all of her hard work and diligence in this. Senior Commander Lynch.
Hi. I just want to talk a little bit about the history, how we got to this point. I took over homicide in 2005 and asked everybody what kinds of things they thought were important, and Sergeant Muldoon, Anita came to me right away and said, I think we ought to be working cold cases. So I was looking through grant funding proposals, and at the same time the President had what he called the DNA initiative, solving cold cases with DNA initiative, and there was a funding stream that came out of that through OJP and the Department of Justice, and we applied for some funds and were lucky enough to be granted funds to start a small cold case unit. It took a while to get everything in order, but once we got up and running, the investigations started. We looked back through approximately 35 years, maybe a little bit older than that. We had about 120 cases or so that in that time period that were marked as unsolved that we wanted to examine for evidence. The theory behind the President's initiative was that there's a lot of solvable cases sitting on evidence shelves around the country, and I think that's probably been proven true. We've gotten DNA in cases that had been examined for DNA before because the technology has improved so much that they can get DNA samples and profiles out of a much, much smaller sample than we were previously able to get DNA from. In addition, there's been a lot of other technological advances that Anita has been able to use, getting samples on degraded samples, getting profiles out of those, using other techniques to differentiate between male and female samples, to further differentiate, to get a profile put together. So there's been a ton of advancements, and we've been very successful in getting some of these cases moved forward. I'd just like to point out that even with all the advances in technology, the cases are painstaking. They're a slog. You got to work through them like I can't tell you how many hours Anita has to put into to just try to put these cases together. You have to re-examine every little piece of evidence and re-examine every person that was involved, and a lot of times re-interview people, try to make cases where some of the witnesses have died and that sort of thing. They're very difficult cases to make. They're very complicated, and they're very, very painstaking and time-consuming. In spite of that, the DNA evidence has made these cases a lot easier for us to get charged. And so we hope that this is the first of many cases. We have some on the horizon that we think show a lot of promise, and we hope to continue to work cold cases into the future if I can drag some more staff out of the chief. So anyway, I'd like to introduce the head of the cold case unit, Sergeant Anita Muldoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm honored and privileged to work on behalf of Mark Shemukenas and the rest of the victims in the cold cases that we have stored in our evidence room and in our files. I think everything's been said. It's very time-consuming, challenging work. I do have a passion for it. I think everybody that's worked on these cases has a passion for them. This has been a cooperative effort. Everybody's worked very hard. And so on behalf of everybody, I'd like to say I'm very happy to see this day come. I do anticipate more charges in the future, hopefully not too far off future. This is not extraneous work. There is no price on a human life, and justice for these victims and their families is invaluable. So thank you for being here.
Anybody have questions about the investigation?
Yeah.
You can.
Okay.
First of all, how long have you been working on this particular cold case, and why?
Well, I first went through all of the cases that I could get through, and I kind of went through a process of not elimination, because I really do hope that eventually we could get to all the cold cases that we have in file, but according to what's possibly there evidentiary, in evidentiary value, and started submitting that evidence to the BCA in conjunction with who's still alive, who's available, who can we talk to, who can we meet with. And they all just keep coming back slowly as I submitted them to the BCA. And so as they come through, this case in particular was one that had been looked at previously, throughout the years. And so I took those that had the greatest strengths first, because this is what the federal grant has allowed us to do, and it's been a great opportunity. So we're grateful for that too.
What has Mr. Ireland been doing these past many years? Did he have a job, or what was he doing, you know?
Well, that's yet to be determined. It doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of information on where he's been yet. Certainly not from his records that we've been able to obtain. He's been rather elusive.
I'm sure some of this information is in the criminal complaint, but can you explain how you put the pieces of the puzzle together? I mean, you talked a lot about DNA, but how did it work in this case? Where did the DNA come from? Where did you send it? How was the match?
Okay. The case occurred in 1977, and at that time, a fingerprint was lifted from the crime scene. The search was exhaustive to match that print, and there were no matches until 1982, when Mr. Ireland was arrested on a sex crime. All of his prints were taken at that time, and there was a match. There was not enough to charge him at that time, and so the case has been kind of waiting for more clues, anything else that we could go on. When I was allowed the opportunity to go through the evidence in this case again, dig through, there's a lot of evidence, and started pouring it into the BCA. At that time, then I also got a warrant for his buccal swab, his DNA, and there was a match for the DNA.
And the DNA from the crime scene came off of scissors?
Yes, it did.
And it indicates that the DNA was a mixture of 2 or more individuals?
We're anticipating, we're still awaiting some results from the BCA, but we're anticipating that the predominant mixture from the, I'm not a scientist, let me just clarify that, but I'm anticipating that the predominant profile on that evidence is from the victim himself.
And that scissors, you think, was one of the murder weapons?
Yes,
And where did the swab come from? You just recently took?
from him, from Ireland.
How did you get him?
From the buccal swab?
But how did you
from-
find him?
Oh, well, we have various ways of tracking people down. So through investigative means, we found him up in Duluth, actually.
And then he was arrested where? Where was he arrested then?
He was arrested in Minneapolis. He had recently lived in Duluth, and he, after we took the swab from him in Duluth, he vanished from Duluth, and we found him again in Minneapolis.
Was he staying with a friend or renting?
No, he was staying downtown in a treatment halfway house.
What was the time frame of when you got the swab and when you arrested him?
A couple of months, about 8 weeks.
Other than the sex crime, what else is on his record?
There's nothing that we've found thus far on him.
So he was undergoing treatment for alcohol or drug addiction?
Yes,
Do you know which one?
I think both.
Both.
Can you describe the crime scene as you've been able to gather it, and also just the kinds of evidence that you've got? There's a lot of it. And also, is there anybody you were able to talk to, investigators who had participated, whether they were retired at all, were you able to find anything like that?
Yes, we have a lot of investigators that worked on the case, and they're still around and still willing and able to come in and talk about the old case, as well as a lot of the people that were involved in the case at the time. The crime scene is one that was extremely brutal, and to describe it would not serve Mark well, I think. And so, but I will say that it was very brutal and very bloody. Several instruments were used on him.
And is it believed that Ireland and the victim here were having a relationship?
There's nothing to indicate that.
Have you spoken to the victim's family?
The victim's family has been informed that we were looking into the case and that there has now been an arrest, yes.
What was the reaction?
Well, they're very pleased. They're very relieved. There is one of the sisters that lives in Florida is hopefully going to be coming up and following through with the case as much as
Is there
possible.
speculation on how the two men came in contact, or how they knew each other, how they wound up in the same apartment, I assume?
The only speculation was that it was a very quick acquaintance, if they knew each other at all. I don't think that there's nothing to indicate that there was any kind of a break-in or anything like that, but just that they may have just met each other,
Like at a bar? Or?
possibly.
Can you talk at all about this suspect's reaction when he was arrested for a crime that happened so long ago?
He didn't ask any questions. He didn't resist. There was no resistance. His affect was rather flat.
Did he say anything?
We talked at length about where he's been and what he's been doing, but he's been in and out of treatment several times, and so that's yet to be discovered, his history.
Did he admit to the crime?
No, not at this time.
Sounds as if, though, according to the criminal complaint, that when he was confronted by the St. Paul police back in the 80s about this, he did deny it.
He denied knowing the victim. Yes, he denied knowing the victim, and he's denying knowing the victim now.
Have you talked to prosecutors? Do they feel they have a pretty strong case here based on this DNA evidence and the scissors?
DNA evidence is strong because we not only have a fingerprint, but we have the DNA. And it isn't DNA that could be found just anywhere. It's pretty compelling.
How does it feel for you as an investigator to have that conversation with Mark's sister? I mean, just how does it feel?
Well, again, I mean, this was a cooperative effort, and I'm very pleased and very proud of the work that we've done. And I've been really grateful for the opportunity to be a part of it. I hope it's just the beginning, to see justice done for these people.
So it's just one sister that's alive in Florida? Does he have any other?
No, he has other sisters. She's been my main contact for the family. It's difficult to contact them all.
Anybody locally? There's still family around here?
Yes, there are a couple of sisters locally.
How many more cold cases are you working on then right now? Is it a long list?
Well, like he said, there are over 100 cases. We're working strongly on several of those cases where we're getting more and more information daily, really, and making contacts and trying to find people.
How many have you solved since you opened the unit?
This is the one. This is the first one.
It's the first charged case.
Yes.
There's a debate on whether you call something solved. We don't call them solved until they're charged. So, or we've eliminated all other suspects, and the prosecution's been declined for other reasons.
This presidential funding, was that under the current administration or under the Bush administration?
I believe the funding came, might have even, the initiative might have started in the Clinton administration, but for sure it was available in the Bush administration.
And do you know how much it was? How much money you got?
I think if I remember right, it was about $14 million was the first. There was several rounds of funding after they started to have some success around the country with people pulling evidence off their shelves. Everybody saves their homicide evidence forever because there's no statute.
Our grant was how big?
Our grant was pretty small. It was just short of $270,000 for 18-month grant.
All right. Oh, and how do you pronounce his name?
Shemukenas. His real name is Martin John Shemukenas.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel.
Can I ask one more question? On the original poster here, it talks about the use of petroleum jelly. I just find that a little odd. Can you talk about that at all?
Well, there was petroleum jelly smeared all over the apartment, and that is kind of odd, I think. But it's one of the main things in all the crime scene photos.
Did it happen upstairs or down?
I'm sorry. One at a time, please.
Upstairs or down in the apartment?
It was downstairs.
Said he had been sexually assaulted at the time. Do you think that's still true?
I don't have any evidence right now of a sexual assault. That isn't part of the evidence that we're using to move forward with these charges. Thank you.